Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP Job Hawes. With me today, a very special guest, the son of Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. He actually has a podcast called Some Kind of Wonderful. He is Mr. Travis Orndorff. Travis, welcome to the two-man power trip. How you doing?
John, how are you, my friend? I want to start out by saying, we were supposed to record last week, and I had some personal things that happened, and so I appreciate you being patient and allowing me to come on this week and spend some time talking about my dad.
No problem. Sounds good. Your dad, obviously one of the greatest legends. If you look at like the Hulk Hogan feuds, I always say like, who are the best feuds? Because he's the guy to me. He's the god of wrestling. You know, when I came up with the, I'm almost 40, and when I came up, he was the guy. But it's like, who are the guys that he drew money with, and who are the guys that really made him better and like made him more important, made people want to cheer? And Mr. Wonderful's got to be right up there. He's in my top five of Hogan opponents where he was neck and neck with Hulk there for a few years. So, I mean, that's pretty awesome and quite, high in the totem pole there, if you will.
Well, and I think you got to understand that. So, if you try to compare generations, you're always going to lose. And the reason I say that is the reason there was an Ultimate Warrior is because there was a Paul Mr. Wonderful Orndorff. The reason there was a Mr. Perfect was because there was a Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. So no, I'm not discrediting those guys for their wrestling or anything. I don't get into that. I can tell you my top 10 wrestlers, but I'm not diminishing what they did, but there always has to be somebody that sets the baseline and the precedent. And my dad drew heat that I think, and I could be wrong, but just from the glimpses I have of wrestling that I watch, that people will never ever ever repeat. Not unless you reinvent the wheel and people start seeing the wheel differently. You know, the UFC back when Hoist Gracie, and then you compare it to now, people forget, those first UFC fights 1, 2, and 3. Nobody's ever forgotten WrestleMania, ever.
Yep,
So
very true.
nope, I can't tell you the first NBA championship. I can't tell you the first World Series, and you'd have to find a historian to even get into that measure. But every single person in wrestling that appreciates the history of where it went from territories to Vince being able to create the first closed circuit television match, the beginning of pay per view, like that's one of those defining. Our timelines are divided by when Jesus died. So there are moments in history that define us for generations. And there is no WWE today if WrestleMania 1 didn't pull off one of the greatest entertainment attractions in history, period. Much like the Roman gladiators. It was a spectacle to be seen, and they've repeated it. But that first one, if you were there, if you knew the energy, if you knew the promos they did, and how God, my dad and Roddy said the most horrible things about Hulk and Mr. T. I remember calling them fat and ugly and bald and like things you wouldn't see that today. It's just different. So I don't want to take away from what happened last night at WWE for the kids that's 12 years old right now. That's going to be his defining moment in wrestling. And God bless him. He found that moment because they were able to duplicate some version. But those of us who were at the beginning will always say we were the greatest generation of wrestling. And I'm not saying that we're right, but it's different. And I can't compartmentalize and unattach myself from the emotions that I saw on television. Understand, like when my dad turned on Hogan, it still hit me. And I had to hear it at school the next day. So it was still an emotional
Yeah.
ride, even if I knew dad was coming home and taking me to a T-ball game. But when I got there, guess what everybody was asking him about? So it was kind of interlaced into our lives. But, when you think of the most iconic matches, they all start right around WrestleMania, unless you're a true wrestling legend and you can go back and watch, Dick the Bruiser and some of these, other guys that were great technical wrestlers, but all from a trailer park and mostly drunk. And then came Dad, who was a physical specimen
Yep.
that did not make sense in this trailer park slash WWF slash wrestling world.
When you look at it, when he did turn on Hulk, man, that did big business. They went to Toronto, right? They do the big event. They think it's going to be 10,000 people, and they said it's over 60. I've seen reports where it says it was 74,000 people at Exhibition Stadium in Toronto. So it's like, wow, they almost didn't realize how much people were going to be impacted by your dad and Hulk and that feud. Because it's like, oh, we'll sell 10,000 tickets. We'll do nice. Yeah, you'll sell 6 or 7 times that. I mean, it's just amazing. That's the heat, and that's people wanted to see that
That's the
match
heat.
badly.
You're right, but let's take a step back. Do you realize how smart of a businessman Vince is?
Hmm, very.
Like, let's not kid ourselves. Those wrestlers did their thing, but the one that was pulling the strings was Vince McMahon Jr.
Yep.
And Vince McMahon Sr. had the vision to give it to his son. His son had the vision to compartmentalize the territories in the Northeast and then pull in talent and then make a deal with USA. None of this is possible. I don't care. I'm not saying he's a good human being. I'm not a politician. I don't care. All I'm talking about is what he did for wrestling. My dad told me on multiple occasions, and I think you can go back and hear some of his interviews. Um, my dad told me, and many people, you have to have the right horses to pull the carriage. And Vince found the right horses. So I will give credit to Hulk Hogan for being who he is, but he isn't who he is without Vince pushing. He had the charisma. I'm not taking away from his talent, but that was a choice that Vince made. And during that time, and people say, your dad should have got the title. To be honest with you, I think we were in the middle of a Cold War. We needed Mr. USA to win. That was kind of that period of time. And not that my dad was anti-American. My dad would go to, events for the military and sign autographs hours after everybody was supposed to leave. So, but it was the image, the Ronald Reagan years. It wasn't till Ronald Reagan went out of office that Hulk Hogan lost the title. I don't think that's a coincidence. I could be wrong. But I think Vince knew his audience. He understood what was needed, and the bad guy needed to lose in the early 80s. Go back to the Miracle on Ice, Russia versus USA, right?
Yep.
Like that was what Vince built that on. And then we saw movies like Rocky that did the exact same thing.
And if you
Sorry,
think
I'll get off
about,
on I can get off on a historical fact around how
yeah,
that is elemental to that time where yes, my dad would have been great with the title, but it wouldn't have fit the period.
I always say that though when they say Piper should have been champ, or they always say your dad should have been champ. Well, how much more money did you want WWF to make? You know what I mean? They were making so much money with Hogan. Like you can't make more money than that, can you? I mean, it's crazy.
No, he had the right image. It was the right time.
Yeah.
And if I was Vince, I wouldn't have done it any different. And I love my father. But I get it. And you can go back to my dad's Hall of Fame speech. He said, people said I was difficult. My dad was difficult, like especially during that period. I think for a couple of reasons. One is he was one of the older wrestlers, so I think he knew his time was, somewhat limited. If I'm not mistaken, Hulk is or Terry is like 7 or 8 years younger than my dad. So when you factor in my dad's, he was 35. If I'm, let me do the math. Give me a second. Yeah, he would have been 34 or 35 at WrestleMania 1. He wasn't 28. Roddy is 10 years younger than my dad.
Hmm.
So when you see WrestleMania, my dad was at his peak, truly at his peak, physically, uh, 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 just in age. He was on the decline after that. He couldn't have put his body in the position the way that Ultimate Warrior looked, in '87. So my dad had that run, and it was amazing. But Dad knew it was going to come to an end because he was injured and he was getting older, and he knew what happens when wrestlers got shelved. So what did he do? He quit before they fired him in his own mind, and I don't think Vince would have ever fired him. I think he would have made him an agent or something. He always
Yep.
promised my dad he'd take care of him as long as he didn't screw him. Well, I think Dad was afraid of getting abandoned, so he abandoned Vince sooner.
It's interesting, and I remember those like things. They kind of were saying he was dead. Remember those the weird commercials and stuff? They were basically, I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but it was so weird. They were kind of like hinting that your dad was dead after when he left WWF. It was very very weird,
Yeah,
strange,
and my
strange.
son actually, so my son is helping me with our social media presence. So he's helping me with the Twitter account, which is you know what, I'm so bad. You're gonna have to forgive me because I'm gonna have to look all this stuff up. Oh nope, my producer just sent it all to me. Great. So you know, we've got at Wonderful Podcast and at Mr. Wonderful Official, which is MR1 Durful Official. And so he's my son is a part of this. He just scanned in about oh God, a little over 470 photos from our family that we
Wow.
found. One of them I just posted of my dad walking through Japan, like all bearded out and like manly in the late 70s in Japan. And then I'm on Twitter at Orndorff Travis L. So anyway, those are just the ways that we communicate with our fans, and we're doing some special things. I think all I get is messages saying thank you for reminding me of your dad, and you know. What's so meaningful is they don't say thank you for reminding me of Mr. Wonderful. They say thank you for reminding me of your dad. So
Hmm.
they do, in my mind, the relationship and the connection I have with the fans that I get to communicate with has been very special, and I'm very grateful.
I got a chance to interview him a couple years back, and it's just funny the way he would like say, "Hogan knew not to mess with me." That this guy knew not to mess with me. Vader knew, or actually Vader didn't know. Then he found out not to mess with him. Just one of those guys, and obviously Hogan's a lot bigger than him, tall, taller, and maybe physically, but he knew like Orndorff is one tough son of a bitch, and I'm good buddies with Kevin Sullivan. Sullivan said that's the one guy. He said him and Haku. Basically, they're like the two guys. But Orndorff, he's like, he always had that extra gear. Your dad always had that extra gear where it's like, okay, he's tough, he's mean, he could be nasty, maybe he could be a little tough, tough on guys, but don't push him because he'll bring it to the extra gear. I love those guys, legit tough guys, but they always have that extra gear, and he always says that about Haku and your dad.
So let me just give you a couple examples of what I've seen in my life. Him and Bobby Heenan were driving through New York. My dad had this, like, I want to say 82 Celica, and dad missed the exit. And if you know anything about Bobby Heenan, he will mess with you and poke and prod you. Well, my dad's on testosterone. Let's not kid ourselves. Dad's on testosterone. He's driving from town to town. Man, if I don't get to bed by 9 o'clock at night, I'm a wreck the next day, right? So he's doing that every night. Anyway, Bobby's messing with him. He ripped the steering wheel off the column, and he
Whoa.
was steering the column over to the side of the road. Bobby Heenan laughing over and over, like in dad's face. And that's the funny thing is Bobby could do it and I could do it. Dad would get so pissed. And I would just look at him and start laughing because I knew that he was, like being ridiculous. And
Yeah.
he'd start laughing with me. And so dad and Bobby are on the side of the road. Dad's hands are all bloody from pulling the column of and so we had a Cadillac as well. I got a couple of them. We had a Cadillac as well, and my brother had done something. Anyway, he stole the keys and ran to the car. My dad grabs the door and he rips it off the hinge, like so it the
Oh,
door's like a pair of
yeah,
off the hinge,
yeah.
but like still on the bolts.
Yep.
But it was flat with the front of the
Holy crap.
excuse me,
Wow.
front of the car. And then one time I can't remember what happened, but okay, two more stories, promise. One was he was in the kitchen. He got some promoter didn't pay him on time or something, and he threw the phone through the microwave. And I don't mean just through the front glass, which is, by the way, like multiple pieces
Yes.
and a
Yep.
gap. He threw
Yep.
it through that, and you could see the dent in the back of the microwave.
Wow. Pretty
So
impressive. Yeah.
Dude, it was very rare. It was so rare that I would see his strength, but there were times you'd go, "How'd you do that?" And at the same time, he had the same he'd go out and play baseball or throw the baseball with me, and he had that much power, but he could also throw a knuckleball,
Wow. Look at that.
like a really good knuckleball.
Good athlete. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's a
Oh,
really good football player too.
dude, he had records in the discus. He had records in the long, what is it, broad jump. And he had multiple track records in Florida, and I want to say a couple of them lasted till the early 2000s. And this is going back to 1965 to 68 before you went to University of Tampa.
What a freak athlete for sure, and obviously, legendary tough guy. Don't piss him off. Don't get on his bad side. Did you ever want to be a wrestler though? Like, did you ever want to follow in his footsteps?
Dad was so funny about that. And here's what I'll tell you. Number one, I have the I'm the physical specimen of a referee, if
Mm,
anything. So like it would be it was unattainable to be my dad. Like if you're going to compare yourself to different wrestlers and different things, dad, his body and everything that he kind of stood for, I was following in those shoes. It wasn't just like I could go up and be a 5'9" wrestler. I was coming behind Mr. Wonderful. And um so a couple things. Dad and I traveled on the road several times, and he used to tell me how bad it was to travel on the road. Like he just hated it. He missed home. And so I had this emotional attachment to my father that I understood what his life was like because he told me, and I never wanted that. So it wasn't that I wouldn't have gone. In fact, I went to the Hall of Fame, and one of the guys there was like, you should be a writer. I can get you on board. And I was like, no, not at all. I don't want to be a part of that world. Not that the people that pursue that that fame and fortune. I'm kind of cool being private. I work for a bank. I'm a performance manager, and I'm do very well after several years of a kind of a lull in my career, and so I'm grateful. And everything I do now is just to celebrate my dad's legacy.
when you look at that legacy and you look, how great he was, what like how would you describe it, or what would you say would be like just the legacy of him? Because I feel like it's more grandiose than maybe people even realize.
So if I had to describe it, I would say trainer, trainer. And I say that in a couple ways. Number one, my dad's body influenced so many people to work out at the gym. Hulk Hogan, um, Terry Balea was all emotion, but dad was all character and discipline. So, you can listen to Real American and it'll get your emotions going, but dad was one in the gym hitting it every day without question. And so when you think about the number of people he influenced because of his intensity, because they've, got a little older and realized that dad played a great role and fulfilled his role, but he did it with such an intensity and with a body and with a discipline. Hogan used to say, eat your vitamins, say your prayers, all that stuff. Yeah, but my dad actually did it. And
Hmm.
people saw that over 40 years of his career. Dad lived that. When you looked at him, you knew he ate his vitamins. And if you ever heard him talk, you knew he said his prayers. When you talk about character, and I don't mean this mean, but Hogan's got his t-shirt and his kids and his restaurants. Um, I don't know how people really feel about him, in the world of wrestling, but I can tell you that every person I've ever come across that was a wrestler said my dad influenced them in a positive way, either by taking the time to talk to him or just his own work ethic. Dad will always be in one of the top 10 um, technical wrestlers of all time, without question. Dad isn't. I'm not saying he's number one, but he's in the top 10. And if you remove all of the hoopla and the gimmicks and all the kayfabe, Dad was a badass, and he lived it every match. And I think people will always remember that, and that's what sets him apart from everybody else. He wasn't necessarily loud. Look at some of his interviews. Look at how he would walk into the ring. He would just look at you with disgust. He didn't yell. He wasn't like Flair and Roddy and Hulk. He was subdued. He just let his body and his body of work speak for itself.
Now, obviously, WrestleMania, those guys that are part of it, he's in a part of WrestleMania lore because he's in the main event. Did he ever say he had an issue with jobbing in that match? Because Piper always wouldn't do it. He had an issue. Did that ever come out that like he may not have want to do it? Because it seems like they held Morocco off the card on purpose, and Morocco even says, "Oh, I was should have been on that card. I wasn't on that card, but they were thinking I might have to be in the main event in case Orndorff doesn't want to do the job. I'd go in and do the job because Piper's definitely not going to do it. Was that ever true? Is any of that true that you know of?
So here's what I'm going to parallel for you, and I don't know if you'll agree or disagree. I don't think it's a coincidence that Thunderlips was in Rocky 2, right?
Rocky 3. Yep.
Rocky 3, excuse me. Yeah, Rocky 3. And who else was in Rocky 3? I'm trying to remember. There was a challenger. Who was it? What was his name?
Clubber Lang, Mr. T.
Oh, yeah, it was Mr. T. What a freaking coincidence. You think they weren't promoting each other? My dad went out to California and auditioned to be in Rambo 2. He was also auditioned to be
Wow.
in Rocky 4. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that before. So
No.
when you think about what you see with Mr. T and all that, that was Vince being a genius, whether I like it or not. But they promoted each other. That's not a coincidence. They made wrestling mainstream through a Rocky 3, which look back wasn't a great movie, but it was influential at the time. It got hundreds of thousands of eyes, and it gave wrestling relevance. It gave it, it's like when they started showing on ESPN, you went, oh, it's a sport, right? When it's
Yep.
just not on USA Network, when it was on Saturday Night Live's Main Event, oh, it replaced Saturday Night Live. What is this? So it gave it relevance in mainstream culture. And Vince has always played on that. For God's sakes, he just brought on Pat McAfee, a punter from the
Yep.
Indianapolis Colts, who, by the way, is freaking hilarious. Love his show. Watch it like every day. But he brought on the social media character,
Logan
Jake
Paul.
Paul. Which one is it?
Logan Paul.
Dumb Paul. Okay, got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So look at what that, like, he brought Mike Tyson in years ago. He brought in freaking A for WrestleMania 1. The referee was Muhammad Ali. Cyndi Lauper was in the corner of Hogan and Mr. T. You think Vince didn't know how to play to Hollywood and to make it mainstream? Dude's a genius. I don't know him as a human being, but he's a genius.
Did your dad ever have a problem jobbing though? Like did he not want to lose to Mr. T and Hogan in that match?
Of course he didn't. Of course he didn't. But that's ego. And what he would say later in life is that he understood. What he didn't understand when he was younger, it's because he wanted to be put over and he felt like it was his money. And, they were all very sensitive. So, and understandably. And I think, bringing Mr. T into wrestling was an insult to those guys that, worked, 3 shows a night, sometimes traveling from town to town to territory, and Mr. T just walks in and starts wrestling. And he was horrible. Like, absolutely, if anybody should pity the fool, it should be anybody watching Mr. T wrestle.
Right.
So it was so bad. And you could see him just kind of working around the ring, and it was embarrassing to wrestling, but they let Hogan carry the card, and they let my dad and Roddy get him over. And they did a great job.
Also, they always say about WrestleMania 3, and your dad mentioned this, he's held off the card because Andre the Giant and Hulk is the main event. And some people throw the weird rumor out there, oh, Andre may not do business. But your dad was saying the real thing was maybe some health issues, because you can even tell in the match, Andre's not moving around great. He's just physically not in great shape. Who knows if he could do it? Is that true? Did they really hold your dad off just in case?
Yeah, that is true. That is absolutely true. In fact, what's crazy is Andre was a different character, and I got to meet him a couple times, but I'll tell you a story that my dad told me that Andre sat down to sign a contract, and the promoter at the time was like, here's the contract, sign it. And Andre goes, no, I do everything by handshake. And that's how Andre did things. Now, he ended up where he didn't sign with that promoter after, my handshake, and ended up going to another promotion. So I don't know I always think Vince could always give him a payday, but in my mind, you were taking an addict out of their element to then come wrestle for a little bit and then go right back to drinking and everything else. So, if I'm not mistaken, Andre wrestled till he was, 92, which was another, 7 years later?
Yeah, 5 years later. Yeah. 87 and 92. Yeah. So
yeah, 87, 92. Yeah, excuse me.
It's just interesting that, like, your dad's such a big name. He was just had that big feud with Hogan that you kept him off. So I always kind of wondered, like, wow, you keep that big of a name off with that big of a feud with Hogan. But then it's like, okay, that would be the only possible suitable replacement if Andre really couldn't wrestle because they just sold out 70,000 people in Toronto. Kind of makes sense here, in Detroit in the Silver Dome. It kind of does make sense because that's the only suitable replacement that you could say Hogan's going to fight in a gigantic, football arena.
Well, and that could have been put over, and Hogan would have been put over, and it would have been a better match than what we saw with Andre the Giant. That was a pitiful
Right.
match. I don't know why everybody acts like it's the greatest thing ever. I get the history of it, but Andre was not in great shape. He couldn't move. He was flat footed the whole time. And I think it may just be the only match that people kind of remember because it was one of Andre's last ones and everybody wants to pay him respect. But if you look at what the Undertaker did for 20 plus years, like his results were always the same. He slowed down a little bit, but it was still a good match. Andre, I think that's all nostalgia and romanticizing it.
And the slam, and
And
everybody remembers the
yeah,
slam.
and I get where that was a big deal, I guess, for the time, but Andre didn't look fast enough to hurt Hogan. It just,
Yeah,
it didn't even come down to a pin. They had to do it just to a slam. So
that's true. I just think
because
it's funny.
Andre wouldn't technically lose to Hogan. That's why they did that.
Right. Yep. But I just think it's funny when, like, going back and looking, it's like, wow, Mr. Wonderful, he should have been on that damn card. You know what I mean? It's WrestleMania 3. He should have been on the card. And it's weird, like, Morocco's not on WrestleMania 1. It's weird when you look at it, like, they both were there at that time and they both should have been on the each respective cards. Like, does he ever say, I missed out on a payday? Or, did he ever say something like that about it?
No, he never mentioned that. I think the only thing he ever mentioned was that he was the backup, and that was kind of the brief of it. And it was explained to him, and he was kind of injured at the time, and so you didn't tell Vince what he was going to do. So I think, and maybe I'm wrong. I think they were. Um, I think Andre did it on purpose because he liked the attention. And, I think he always knew he could wrestle, but, they couldn't take that chance with him because he was so sensitive.
He's got to tease him. You know what I mean? Hulk, I may not lose. I may not wrestle. Vince,
Right. Oh, he was
he's
down to
messing
the
with
end.
him.
Like, I may not even let you slam me. So that was like, y'all can tell me how great Andre was. Like, he was non-negotiable in the ring because of his stature.
For sure.
He wasn't
When
a
you're
team player.
when your dad leaves and he quits Vince, like you mentioned, did he think he was going to be quitting the business, or did he know, like, he knew where his next destination was? He knew he wanted to keep wrestling. He just didn't want to wrestle for Vince anymore.
No, my dad opened a bowling center.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he opened a bowling center and started on the second one, got that open. Took some bad financial advice from a financial advisor. And the guy didn't pay my dad's taxes for several years, as well as a couple other things, and had set up some shady deals where he, pull all the profit from it. And so dad had him for about, I guess, 5 years. And after that, he went back to wrestling, independent.
Did he
So his
have a?
intent was to get out of wrestling. In fact, when he opened the bowling center, you weren't allowed to drink in it. We didn't have any alcohol
Oh wow,
because my dad became a Christian, God, 1986, maybe 85. And so when he opened the bowling center, it was going to be alcohol free because he grew up with alcoholism.
wow, interesting. Did he, like, foresee himself as like a entrepreneur or a businessman and not a wrestler anymore? Was he, like, kind of gonna go in that direction?
Well, back in the late 80s, as you had a little bit of money, people were more susceptible. When you think about the athletes that got all their money taken, it hasn't been as bad over the last 10 years as it was back then. So, um, dad was hurt. My dad told me on so many occasions, and keep in mind, while he was on the road, we talked almost every night on the phone, even if it was for 5 minutes. I could be running to a baseball game. He'd be like, son, do a good job. Don't do anything half-ass. That was his biggest thing. Like, don't do anything half-ass. I've yet to figure out what that means, but I'm pretty sure I got an
Yeah,
idea. But those were just certain things. That one, he would have said, your ass is grass and I'm the lawnmower. If I
heard that
didn't
one
do,
before. Yeah.
what I needed to do. But he was
Yep.
always an encouragement. He was always a phone call away. I could call dad right before a match or right after. He'd pick up the phone. I could call into the line if anything was like. He always gave me a phone number that I could reach, and but he called home every night. So when you think about when what with those periods of time, Dad had been on the road at that point from 1969 when he started playing college football. He was on the road pretty much until 1987. So that's 27 years between, college football games, going on the road to then travel from town to town, territory to territory. But so I was born in 78 and I was born in Tampa. We lived in Boca. Then we moved up to Pensacola. Then we moved out to Oklahoma, Baton Rouge, and then Shreveport. And then we moved to, I think, Tennessee, North Carolina, and then Georgia, all before I was 5.
Wow. Quite a lot of
So
moving around.
yeah, and I mean, obviously, I was there, but I don't remember it. But Dad had this crazy lifestyle, and he was in his late 30s. He was hurting. He just wanted to be home and be a dad. And when he came home and we had the bowling center, Dad and I went to Sunday school together, church together, church on Wednesday nights. We went to the gym most days of the week. When I was in school, even if I just went there and hung out with him. He went to all my baseball games. He went to all my choir, when I was a singer at one point. And so he went to all my recitals. That's what you call them. He put me in cotillion. So I had to learn which fork to use and how to button my jacket. And
Hmm.
like, that was how I spent time with Dad. It wasn't this wrestling lifestyle that most people believe. He took me hunting. Yes. But he also took me to my cotillion lessons.
Nice. Look at that. Good dad. Yeah. Really, really great to you. He had a lot of injuries. Obviously, he had a neck injury. His arm was atrophied. I mean, did he constantly, be in pain for most of his life, like as he was kind of going through? Because he seemed like he had so many injuries.
John, it's I'm trying to think about how to say it. Okay, I got a great example. So I want to say 28, and I found out I had a slip disc in my back, and it was starting to, cause what do you call it? Oh God. Anyway, nerve damage. So I go to Dad, and I'm like, Dad, this is killing me. Like, I can barely stand. And we're in the car, and he goes, well, just take half of one of these pills. I take 2 a day, or I take 2 in the morning, 2 at night, or something like that. Just take half of one. I took that half, and I was laying in the floorboard begging my father to slow the car down because we were going so fast. It was
Wow.
the worst feeling on the face of the planet. I say all that to say Dad's pain was so bad that um, there might have been. My grandfather passed away. He cried there. His dad passed away. He cried there. When I graduated from high school and when my son was born and my youngest were born, he cried there. So we'll say he cried in front of me 5 times. I probably saw him cry 25 times out of pain. And it wasn't like that. I'm not tough. It was just tears in his face when I would ask him, but he wouldn't cry. He'd
Hmm.
just go, Trav, I can't move. And so he had to get special mirrors on his car because he couldn't turn his neck, right? So he had his second through eighth vertebrae taken out. They put in a cadaverous vertebrae with a titanium rod. He then got cancer after that, which closed his throat. Both of his knees needed to be replaced. He had spurs in both shoulders. His right arm, what he would do is so ironic, my right arm was paralyzed like his. It's just a little different because I actually had the surgery to fix it. I had a bicep slap tear and ended up with the rotator cuff and labrum coming off, and my tricep twisted over the bone, spiral fractured the humerus. Bone fragments go through my radial nerve and leave me with wrist drop. Dad had a very similar injury, except for his bone spurs went through the nerve, whereas mine happened all at once and I could recover, right? Dad wouldn't
Right.
get the surgery. So Dad could use his hand, but from the time he was 50 till he passed at 72 or 71, he would put food in his right hand and he would pull his hand up to his mouth. He couldn't pull his hand up. And so after years of these pain meds, which I'd say he took them for about 3 to 5 years, his stomach was so messed up and so bound up, like he was like, Trav, I can't go to the bathroom. It is like it's unbearable. And so he quit taking them. And I want to say he quit taking them around 55, 56. And I don't recall him ever using another pain pill in 14 years. And most of it was because he wanted to go to the bathroom normal.
Wow.
But he would ache and moan. He tried some medicinal medicine that helped at times, but the problem was he couldn't remember to take it on time, and it wasn't easily accessible, and I wasn't available to administer it. But he tried different ways, but in the end, he was such a tough SOB. He just didn't relent. I honestly, like, I can tell you he took those meds, but I never really heard him complain.
Hmm. That seems like, like getting into that stuff is crazy because you did all this stuff for the fans, and for our and Vince's pockets and his own profit too. But he did so much for the fans. It's just crazy to think some of these guys. It's like, wow, they really just destroyed their bodies for the rest of their lives. Physically, mentally, internally. Just they kill themselves for the business, and we're just sitting back as fans, like, wow, that was a great match, but we don't see behind the scenes of their pain, really.
Well, John, let me ask you this. If you had my dad's physical abilities and you grew up in a broken home, molested, weren't around your mom, weren't around your dad, all you could be was an athlete. And then wrestling shows up and you feel important and you come down a runway and people hate you or love you, but you control that
Yep.
and you find acceptance, you find a family, and all of a sudden, this loner that could beat the living crap out of you with his bare hands, blindfolded with one hand behind his back, becomes the good guy and the bad guy every night, where he can exercise those demons and then go back to a hotel room and sleep it off. Like, these guys didn't choose wrestling, wrestling chose them. And I don't think people understand that. It's not like now. John, if my son came up to me and started hitting the gym and blah 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 blah, he wanted to be a wrestler. It's not like what would have happened back when my dad was there. You want to be a wrestler because you got nothing else. You know what my dad was doing before he became a wrestler? He was trying to sell insurance for MetLife, and he was so bad at it that my grandfather, who was an executive, was watching wrestling on a Saturday morning. And my dad looked at it and said, "I can do that." And my grandfather said, I'll make a phone call on Monday. And he hooked him up with Hiro Matsuda. That's how my dad became a wrestler, because
Hmm.
God knows he was never going to be an insurance salesman.
Yeah,
And
that's
if you
true.
if you
Yeah.
you could bring all those guys out of the grave right now, you tell me one of them that would change a thing.
Right, probably none of them, yeah. Yeah, they love the business, yeah,
That
and
they did what they did because they loved it so much, even if it is beyond our own rationale. Like, you don't know what those guys were going through. It's kind of like, so I'm a huge University of Miami Hurricanes fan, and I've seen guys come out of the slums of the University of Miami or out of 305 Dade County, and to see what they accomplish, and they become business owners and prolific in their communities. Like, that's the most encouraging thing I've ever seen. And to be honest, that's my dad. He came out of a trailer park, became Mr. Wonderful, became the greatest father that I could have ever fathomed. And he's made me the man I am. And I'm grateful for his presence. And I know right now he's sitting down saying, or he's up there saying, Travis, why didn't you do this 10 years ago, you jackass?
yeah. Yeah, why didn't you do it? Obviously, circumstances in life
Yeah.
happen, but yeah, yeah.
I didn't know. I know that sounds stupid. I didn't know. I I just kind of grew up thinking my dad was such a big figure. What could I offer anybody? Like, I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm not insecure. I just, like, my dad's wrestling career, I'm not going to go to WrestleMania. I don't have that kind of clout. So I'm not going in the business. So for me, the reason I even started doing this is because it became so personal, because I had to heal. Because when my dad passed away, I lost it. And this page allows me to
Heal a little
spend the
bit.
time with him that I
Yeah.
missed out on because I had other things going on.
Right.
And the cool part is my son's doing it with me.
Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Get to pay some tribute to your dad, pay some tribute to grandpa. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, he and again, my son's doing a great job with the Twitter account. I'm so proud of him. He's he's kind of speaking vicariously through me, but at the same time, like we'll connect before he posts something, and I'm just asking him to dig into his father's heritage, like find this stuff, and so he's digging in and seeing what his grandpa did, and I'm he's in college. He's supposed to go to law school. That son of a gun better do it, by the way. Hope he's
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah.
But he's dug into this and he's spending time with our family members and getting those photos, and he's been scanning them in, and it's becoming a family affair is the best way to put it.
Very, very cool. It's awesome. And even the podcast is great. Some kind of wonderful because it's like very unique to you, but also unique to other wrestling families. You know, you're saying you got to keep it in the family. Podcast is the very, very similar thing or the same thing. Garrett Bischoff, obviously, the son of Eric, doesn't necessarily have to be the son or daughter, but somebody that's related to somebody in wrestling. Just tell us a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, so it was kind of a you know, so I had an older brother and he made a lot of mistakes. And it was such a unique childhood. I always joke that, and it was a true question. Somebody said, what's it like to be, to be like the son of a professional wrestler? And I was like, I don't know what's it like to be the son of a plumber. It's
Hmm.
just my dad. And then I realized there was a lot of people I could ask that question to that would understand where I was coming from. And so when my dad passed, I just felt a calling, if you will. I saw a need in our community that all of us have a story to share, and it's a little different, but it's like you guys can watch Dark Side of the Ring, and that's to me jaded. It's a great show, but it's an hour long episode of all the bad stuff versus I want the emotional context as well as the perspective of the individual I'm talking to. So, talking to Garrett, I got to see what it was like to be to actually go into wrestling when everybody expected you to. And
Right.
I never had experienced that till I talked to him. And then I kind of live vicariously through him and going like, oh, I get it. And then you had that moment with your dad. Well, my moment with my dad was inducting him into the Hall of Fame at the the CAC Cauliflower Alley Club. So I've had these moments, but to hear Garrett's perspective was so cool because I could relate to it in such a different way. But at the same time, those guys don't have things I have. But Garrett would go hunting with my dad. So he knew what my dad was like. So when I could say, Dad did some crazy stuff, and he'd be like, oh, yeah, I was there with him. And then the next episode, oh, God, who was it? It was uh, I know we had Fallon on the third. Who was the second? Oh, Jenny Santana. So it was, the illegitimate daughter of Tito Santana, who was one of my dad's best friends.
Yep.
And, to hear her story, like that's how weird can you get other than wrestling, right? This is, stranger than Florida. So I get to hear the perspective of somebody that, you know, didn't have the expectations growing up, but grew up around it and then found out who her dad was and found a calling to then pursue it. Then I got to sit down with Fallon, which is Roddy Piper's daughter, and hear about his conversion to faith as a Christian and how he, apologized and made up for some of those mistakes. And then we went on to Brawny with a Dynamite Kid where he abandoned her for years. And, I think and I got to speak, via message to Bronny's mom. There was a lot of healing that happens in these conversations because they now know. I was like, what went up, what went on with Dynamite Kid? Tom. I'm like, my dad changed after these concussions, and they were like, yes, that's exactly what happened. His Dynamite Kid's wife said, before his head injuries, he was a different human being. That's not a coincidence. So I'm having some honest conversations with people that we're able to kind of peel back the layers and find out what's behind these men. And it's genuine and it's emotional, and I'm grateful. And so we've got a couple of people lined up. I'm going to call Lacey out right now. Lacey Abilene, she's Ray's daughter, Big Boss Man. So her and I are building a relationship. I'm so proud of her. She just started the Big Boss Man WWE official page. So find that on Instagram and follow. But her and I are going to have a great conversation here in the next couple of weeks.
Nice, very cool, and it's very good concept, unique concept. I mean, obviously, it's unique to you guys. So, I mean, that's kind of a very very cool thing. How did you just like come up with it? You just like literally like you said was like, other people are experiencing this. I should just have a podcast. We should talk about it. I mean, was that just basically it?
No, not at all. Actually, it's a funny story. So I was, and I've told the story a couple times, and I'll share it with you, and I can do it without a lot of the hurt that came before. So my dad was molested when he was young, right? And so was I. And we were driving down the road off of what's called Highway 20. We're driving through Fairburn. I used to go to Landmark Christian School in Fairburn, Georgia. And so I said, Dad, I need to tell you something. And I told him, and he's like, I know, I've been there. And then he looked at me and said, someday I expect you and I've built you to share my story. And so I didn't understand what that meant at the time. But my mom has told me since I was a kid, you and your dad are different. You and your dad are different. The relationship you have with him, nobody else has. And, I go back to when I was saying earlier, like I could just start laughing at dad and he'd start laughing with me. But he ribbed me so many times, but I could laugh with him. I remember when I was a kid and went to the movie theater and my girlfriend was sitting there, and he came over and sat down and made me sit in his lap next to her.
Oh my god.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like,
Oh geez.
oh, it was me, him, and Brad Reagans,
Oh
who was
hey,
a
Brad. Yeah,
yeah, Brad,
legendary. Yeah,
incredible, like
wrestler trainer. Yep.
phenomenal, lifelong wrestler, like just like Hall of Fame kind of guy. So we're driving in the car, and like I'm 16, 17, but the three of us had gone to the gym and we're leaving. And then my this girl I was trying to hook up with, it was in the car next door, and Dad rolls down the window. And I'm in the middle, and Brad leans down, so it looks like it's me and my dad just sitting really close together in the cab of a truck.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they just would rib the crap out of you. So, going back to your original question, this is this is my way of healing, and my way of hearing the other stories that are out there that, um, you know, I've heard a lot of podcasts, and there are a lot about wrestling. I want to talk about the human beings. These guys were real, and they had some really messed up stuff. Many of them found Christ. Some of them didn't. I'm not, condoning either decision. I have my own personal opinion. I'll keep it to myself. But at the end of the day, these guys, man, they have a story, and it's so much deeper than putting a snake around somebody's neck, or the stunner, or the pile driver, or the leg drop. Like, my dad impacted millions of people in a positive way because of his work ethic and discipline. And it doesn't surprise me that he left, Madison Square Garden one night, and a couple kids walked up, wanted his autograph. And I got this message from one of the fans. He said, I was 16, met your dad outside of the Madison Square Garden. He was wearing a towel over his head, trying to escape everybody. And I walked up and said, Mr. Orndorff, can I get your autograph? And he said, nope, but I'll take you to get a piece of pizza. And he took him and his friend down to the pizza place. They sat down. My dad said, what do you guys want to be when they grow up? And they both said wrestlers. And he talked about how they had to hit the gym, listen to what their mama said, and take care of their bodies and quit eating pizza.
That's great. Oh my god. Imagine that. Like you're walking out, you see one of the big stars in the company. It's like, can I get your autograph? No, but let's go for some pizza. You like, you mark
I
out.
can
You're just
send
like,
you the
holy
message
crap.
on my Instagram, bro.
Yeah,
I like it.
unbelievable.
I can't make that stuff up.
That's
And,
awesome.
and
Yeah.
here's the crazy part. Dad did that 1,000 times. It was over and over. Like, the only regret I actually get on Instagram is I didn't get to meet him. The people that met him are like, "Oh my god, he could not have been a kinder soul." Like, I'm not joking. When I was 18 years old and I brought, no, I was, excuse me, 20 years old, and I brought my girlfriend over and we went upstairs and we were sitting up in his room to watch some TV. And he'd be like, "Come sit on my lap." And he would just sit there and love on me. And my girlfriend be sitting there, right in the chair. And she'd be like, "What is
Yeah.
going on?" I'm like, this is my dad. He's a cuddly dude. And you come over here and you love on him, you kiss him real quick. And then, he's like, "All right, have a beer."
Yeah, but that's a great moment for like a fan because you literally will never forget that in a million years. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that, like where a guy gives you an autograph, you may forget it here and there, but guy takes you out for pizza. I mean, and it's Mr. Wonderful. You're never gonna forget a memory like that. That's awesome, especially for those kids. I mean, that's great.
By the way, he didn't eat the pizza.
Oh no. Oh,
No, that was the funny part.
so it would be unhealthy, I guess, for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, I'm not kidding you. He used to eat sardines and crackers on the airplane.
But isn't there cheat meals or whatever? Can't you cheat? No, or no?
No, my father didn't.
No.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Are we talking about Paul Orndorff?
Yeah, I don't know. Like The Rock always goes, "Oh, I'm having my cheat meal for today." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and
Paul
it's
Orndorff
he,
didn't have a
yeah.
cheat meal.
Wow.
Paul Orndorff
Yeah,
didn't think of it that way. He was
yeah,
intense. And I'm not
yeah.
the Rock's right, dude. Have a good time.
Right,
Like,
right, right.
but I would say my dad's cheat meal. Excuse me. My dad's cheat meal, if there was one, and it probably happened 5 times a year. When we would leave Hartsfield International Airport, we would pass in Riverdale, Georgia, the Krispy Kreme donuts. And if that hot donut sign was on, we'd go in there and get 2 dozen, and dad could kill a full dozen with some milk.
Nice. Yeah, those are some good stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
Nice.
dude, they were amazing. Back in the 80s and 90s, I don't know if there was anything sweeter or better. But dad, that was the only time. I'll give you an example, and maybe this, forgive me if I'm going over my time, but so I, started dating this girl, and she took me to Bennigan's, and I was like 19, and they were like, "These are potato skins," and I'm like, "What is this? Oh my god!" And
Yeah.
then they came out with their ice cream flavors. I'm like, "You have more than vanilla?" And I'm like, "Oh, what is this on the table?" They're like, "It's salt." I'm like, "Oh my god, I've never seen that before." Like, I'm not kidding. We grew up, mom would make like tilapia, and we would get a lemon wedge and hot sauce. I was 7. Do you
Hmm.
know how bad hot sauce tastes when you're 7? It's horrible.
Yeah, there
Like,
it's an
we were
acquired
not
taste.
allowed to
Yeah.
eat anything that was unhealthy. Every day I ate the same lunch for like 9 years.
Wow. Very regimented. Well, big time
That's
regimented.
how dad was. I was probably the only like 15-year-old with like the protein farts.
I could see that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my god.
Oh, it's brutal.
Later on in life, when he had some health issues, and obviously then he eventually would pass away. Did you get any heat or any trouble when you started posting stuff when he was, when he was having his dementia problems and he was had did you get heat for posting the videos? Because it seemed like you got a lot of backlash from fans saying like, "Oh, he wouldn't have wanted you to post that," and even some wrestlers and announcers like, "Oh, why are you posting that?" Did you get heat for that?
Yeah, that would be an understatement. Like, I got threats.
Wow.
And everybody was pointing to different people, saying your dad would never want his legacy to look like this, and you're disrespecting him. And what they didn't know, and what they didn't care about, and which it's social media. They all jump to conclusions. And I understand. I was in a situation where they would not allow me to access my father. Like,
Wow. Yeah, it sucks. That's terrible.
Grady wouldn't allow me in because of COVID, and I had to go to extreme measures because I didn't even know where he was. He had been moved 3 times, and when I would call the facility, they wouldn't tell me anything. So when I finally got in and saw him, I was so mad. I don't think people will. I don't care what you think, but if you walked in on that, what would you do?
Right. You got to expose it.
And then all of a sudden people didn't want me to expose it, and that didn't make any sense to me. Why would you want my dad to be in that situation?
Right. You got to get him out of there. Yeah.
And I caught heat from a couple of wrestlers who text me individually. And I saw some posts from different journalists saying Paul would never want this and I was exploiting him. And I'm like, you guys have no clue who I am. You don't know me. I've never, ever in my life put myself out there on Instagram or anywhere else to try to get recognition as being my my dad's son.
Right.
You don't see me on Facebook, Instagram, social media. Like you just don't see me. So to get those accusations was really hurtful when I was very explicit that I was trying to expose the truth. And I've had to go through many legal steps, including today that you know about. I had to go meet with an attorney today. So there has been many legal steps I've had to go through both before and after that situation. And no matter what anybody thinks, at the end of the day, you saw the last picture because you saw the product of my work where he and I were hugging in the middle of my living room.
Yep.
And if I catch heat for that, I'm fine because I got that moment. And I don't know if I would have had it otherwise.
Was he mad, or was he even maybe even able to say? Was he mad that he posted, or was he happy because you got to have that moment with him?
If I could speak for my father, it would be unfair. I
Mm,
can't. But what I can tell you is if you saw the first video and what his face looked like in the hospital, and then you see what his face looked like when I was taking him home to my house, I think that answers every question you have.
right. Yep. For sure.
So I don't know what he would say, but I saw what he felt because we held hands for hours upon hours every day, and I spent time with my daddy. So I'm grateful. I don't care what anybody thinks. I get those experiences, and you can't take that away from me.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, no problem at all.
Woo!
Totally understandable. Totally understandable. Absolutely.
Great questions. You got me off guard.
Yeah. Hey, you got to do. But as we wind it down, we'll head towards the finish here. Just was curious. Does he have a Legends contract? Is there a WWE Legends deal? Is that on the table, or was that gone?
So, John, I'm working on it, and I
Oh,
don't
okay.
have that answer. Just to be honest, if I had to have an opinion, my dad had no representation or anybody speaking on his behalf, and I don't think he was in a good place to negotiate. So, I'm actually praying literally that the WWE will once I get my dad's estate settled and I can speak on his behalf, I hope they will work with me and put together some things that will both respect their business as well as my dad's legacy. I'd love to see him in WWE 23K if that's
Yeah.
possible. So,
Yeah.
some people are rooting for their dad to go in the Hall of Fame. I want to see my dad in a video game. And it's been a long time. I think it was God, Super Nintendo 64. The last time I saw my dad in a video game. So I'm going to work on that. I want to build my legacy into one of character and one that represents what he stood for. And he openly admitted he was hard to work with, but I'm not because he taught me not to be. So
Right.
hopefully they'll
Right.
deal with me.
Hey, those guys from that era are notoriously hard to work with, but they were right. If you really look at it, like, oh, Hogan wouldn't do this, Hogan would do that. He turned out to be right. Like, you do have to protect your character. Piper was right to do that. Your
Yep.
dad was right. Warrior was right to be tough with Vince. Jesse Ventura was right. Like all these guys, I mean, they're right. But it's funny nowadays; these guys just get walked all over. Like you almost wish, like, I wish you guys were like these guys
But
back
they
in the
can
day
cut
when
you
they were
so
tough.
quick and replace you so quick. It wasn't like
Yeah.
that back then. You
Yep.
couldn't just pull Paul Orndorff out in the middle of that heat after he
Oh, you're
turned
not
on him and go,
replacing him.
okay,
Yeah.
let's go Big John Studd. Like you didn't have that element. Not that
Right.
Big John Studd wasn't a great wrestler. It's just hard to replace that. And they were going territory to territory. You got to remember there wasn't the TV exposure. So it was harder to expose a new wrestler over a short period of time like it is now. So it's just a different business.
And him and your dad and Hogan in a cage match getting over a 10 rating, you can't kind of replace that with somebody else. I mean, other guys can get almost as good ratings, but that high of stuff, I mean, you're talking a rarefied air. I mean, people were
Right,
super,
absolutely.
super interested in Hogan Orndorff, big time. It was
Absolutely.
awesome.
He looked like he would kill everybody. And I think that's something that was hard to replace. Everybody else wrestled. Dad looked like he was going to kill you. And I
So
think
what?
he might have even thought about
Probably, yeah.
it.
So what's next though for everything? I mean, I know you're getting some stuff in place. I know Pro Wrestling Tees. He has a store, but you're going to expand on it. Like, what else is in place?
We got the tennis shoes going with at Eccentric One, which are Mr. Wonderful shoes. I just have worked with a couple of attorneys, and at the end of the day, I want you to understand that I am so grateful what the wrestling fans have done for my father. We're looking to build out this platform. I don't want a penny from it. I don't. I have no intentions of making any money off of this. This is going to be built to build my dad's legacy. It will take care of 50% of the profits will take care of my mother, and the other 50% of the profits will go to a nonprofit to help other wrestlers. And we'll find those nonprofits. I know the CAC Club. I would like to reach out to DDP with his yoga and see what I can do to assist, as well as any other platform where people know that there are wrestlers in need. So many people gave back to my father that the least thing I want to do is to disrespect that and then rub it in their face with some kind of business plan and profitability. I want to give back to my family and I want to give back to the community.
Nice, great stuff. And again, give us all the plugs of like the social media and everywhere else where we can find some
All
kind of
right,
wonderful.
I got to go
Yeah.
back to my test message. Is that bad? I got my producer. He's got me on. He's like, dude, don't forget. So we got at Wonderful Podcast, at one DERFUL podcast, and at Mr. Wonderful Official at MR1 Durful Official. You better know what Durful is. And I think we've nicknamed our the people that listen to our podcast Turtleheads. Do you remember that from the Ivan Putski interview with my dad?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
That's a
so
wow. That's a random reference. That's
we're
great.
calling
Yeah.
the listeners Turtleheads. That's what we're doing right now. I hope they're not offended, but it's obviously in reference to a funny thing. I always
Yeah.
it's so funny how I watch my dad's like promos and he misspeaks so many times, but he's so big nobody corrects him. He's like, you know what? There's too much glare in those nails. uh Dad, that's what happens when you buff them. So it makes sense,
Yeah.
how Turtlehead's poking out, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, Mean Gene? And Mean Gene's just dying laughing, and nobody's gonna
Yeah.
correct him. He's
Yep.
255 pounds, can rip your head off
Yep.
for real.
Exactly. Yep. For sure. But Travis, thank you so much for all the time, and thank you for sharing all those stories. It could be a little tough, but I really, really appreciate it. Great stuff. Great content.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it, buddy. I hope we'll do it again.